Today, our subject is voice leading. That is the movement of individual voices within triads and seventh chords from one harmony to another. We're going to focus today on triads because once again, as I've been saying before, if we understand how the triad functions in functional harmony, and also in this case, how the individual voices lead from triad to triad, we will understand everything else there is in harmony. Any other structures, seventh chords, ninth chords, etc., all fall into place if we get these rules correct at the very beginning. So let's first start with some definitions, so we get very clear in our definitions here. There are two ideas that are constantly working together in our system of harmony. That is the idea of chord progression, harmonic progression, and voice leading or counterpoint, that is the individual lines that lead to chords. In that sense, we have two different ideas that are simultaneous. One is the idea of progression, harmonic progression. And by harmonic progression, we mean how do we move what harmony is likely and logical from this triad to this triad. That these two logical movements are logical to our system, moving from this harmony, and that has a logical progression. One progresses to the other. Again, as opposed to harmonic progressions that do not make sense to ear, do not have a logical progression. For example, from this harmony to, let us say, this harmony. Pretty. I think all of us can recognize we have two separate structures that are in themselves recognizable, triads, in this case two major triads, and that their color is very interesting, but their progression, the sense that one logically leads to another, is missing. Harmonic progression is the logical progression from one harmony to another, what leads to another. So that's one issue that's going on in our music all the time. The other is what we refer to either as voice leading or more correctly counterpoint, but we use voice leading because voice leading is how we're thinking of it when we think from a harmony standpoint. That is, again, this duality in our music, that our sense of anything happening simultaneously comes from the dance of individual melodic lines that form those structures. So it's the play between those lines forms those structures. The structures are here. And voice leading refers to the play between lines, that is the dance of two or more voices counterpoint and how they move from consonance to dissonance. Voice leading then is how from this harmony to say this harmony, how do we move from one another with individual lines? How do we move from each one of these elements in a triad to each one of these elements in a triad that makes logical sense, and we hear the melody and we hear the structure simultaneously. That is the melodies, we hear the individual melody from individual note to moving to note, and we also hear the logical progression from one harmony to another. Both those things simultaneous. So those are our definitions we need to understand proper voice leading from one harmony to another. Now once again, I want to emphasize once again that this is a dual system. This is a system where the vertical and the horizontal, we're thinking both simultaneously. What is the melody doing? The individual line of each voice, each note in that triad, moving to each note in the next triad. And at the same time, that we have a logical series of harmonies vertically stacked that we recognize in this case as triads, later on seventh chords and so forth. But we recognize those individual parts. So, what are the rules that we can do this and make a logical sense of this? How can we make a logical sense from moving one voice to another? The best way is to be very, very conservative and follow the very conservative rules that make these melodies recognizable so we hear them, and at the same time logical, that we understand that it's a logical progression that makes sense, and at the same time we hear the harmony logically progressing. So we stick with very, very conservative rules when we learn this. Now, in practice, we may break these rules all the time for other reasons. For good, solid musical reasons, we may say these solid guidelines, that guarantee that everything's going to work, may not apply here. For artistic reasons, I will, as it were, violate them or ignore them for a moment to get something else that I want. So, these are not rock-hard rules you cannot violate, but for the purposes of learning excellent voice leading, to learning it correctly, it is best to know these rules and use them, and then deviate from them when you have an artistic purpose to do so. So, let's learn those rules, and it should be pretty straightforward. But let's start first with the idea of a voicing of a harmony in and of itself. If we're going to voice a triad, we generally want to think in 4 voices. Remembering that almost all of our music can be distilled down to 4 voices. That correspond more or less to the human voice. High women, low women, high men, low men. So more or less soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. And we designate this on a grand staff that we have 4 separate voices by using the staffs, putting 2 voices on each, and using our stems to indicate which voice we are working with. If we have a grand staff here, and we are designating 4 voices on it, we will put the soprano and the alto voice, that is the women's voices or the higher voices, on the upper staff to indicate the soprano. We will have a stems up for the note, even when it goes below, where normally we would put stems down or above. For the alto voice, we will do the opposite. The stem will be always down, even when, if we had only one voice, it wouldn't make sense. The same thing is true on our grand staff for the men's voices. We put them on the bottom staff using a bass clef or F clef, the tenors on top, and the basses on bottom. Tenors will always have stem up, even when it's not correct in terms of which direction we would do that without any indication. Baritones or basses, stems down, again, even though it looks a little bit odd to our eye in terms of the stem, seems the wrong direction, but what it's telling us is there are 2 separate voices here, 2 separate voices. Okay, so that's the first bit. The second is, of course, we have the idea that we are working with a triad. Now, a triad, and we'll just take one here in the lower clef, D major triad. A triad, of course, is 3 notes. Now, in 4-note voicings, we have a situation where we need an extra voice. We'll have to double one of these pitches. Traditionally, we double the root. We double the root when we have a 4-voice realization of a 3-voice harmony. We double the root. If we cannot double the root, we will double the third. If, for the reasons we learned in voice leading, the voice leading makes it so moving to the root, to double the root is impossible, then we double the third. We only double the 5th in certain specific places, and we'll get to them. Only certain specific places. And then we will double the 5th for a specific reason. But in general, we avoid doubling the 5th. Instead, we double the root or the third. Try to double the root, and if your voice leading doesn't allow you to double the root, double the third instead. Having said that, I want to emphasize once again, having said that, if you pick up a chorale by J.S. Bach or anyone else, you're going to find many instances where he will violate these rules because he has another artistic purpose for doing so. He has an artistic reason to say, okay, these rules do not apply at this point because I have a more important purpose. I have an artistic reason to not do that. So, if we are then going to put a 3-voice harmony into a 4-voice setting, we're going to probably, in this case, double the root and have 2 Ds in our D major harmony. Now, one of the things you want to learn first is proper spacing. The proper spacing is, generally speaking, and again, this is a general rule, the widest gap in your interval will be lowest in the lowest voices, and as you go up, you will get more narrow. We will get more narrow as we head up, and as we go down, we will widen out the interval. Again, having said that, it is a general rule, not an iron principle. We will often have the difference maybe of a 4th and a 5th, or a 3rd and a 4th, that it's almost larger or smaller, and that's okay. So if I'm going to voice this harmony, and this is the case we're doing with a D major harmony in group position, then probably I'm going to have a D in the bass no matter what, because I've only indicated a root position harmony. It's a D in the bass. Now it can be this D, or this D, or this D for our basses. For our basses, that's a very high D. This is even a very high D if you're on a cello. For this is fine, and then for basses, that's about as low as you can get, and that's going to be very hard to sing for young choirs and so forth. So generally speaking, that's going to be my best choice. Now, my tenor voice, I want to have a quite wide interval, so I can choose a D, I can choose an A, and F sharp's getting pretty close. I could live with it, but that's going to make, probably going to make it very much a closer, the alto close to as well. So I'm going to choose, for my purposes, another D here. Having done that, I'm going to try not to double any more pitches. Instead, I'm going to choose from my two other pitches, which would be my third and my fifth and my D major triad. Now I could go right here for my alto, or I could go here. If I go here, I have an interval of a third. If I go here, I have an interval of a fifth. Both are smaller than my interval of an octave between tenor and bass, so that's a good choice. Either one's fine. For my purposes, I'm going to choose that A, and that then leaves me one thing left. I have to got rid of my A, and now I have an F sharp, and that automatically goes right in place. Is that okay? Well, take a look. You have a fifth here and a sixth here. Oh my gosh, that's a little wider. Well, that's okay. In this case, that's going to be okay. Between the fifth and the sixth, that's just fine. Now listen to this on the piano. This is our D major triad. Here is the voice as I've written it. It has a specific sound, doesn't it? It has a specific sound to it. Let's do another voicing. This time I'm going to choose, instead of my D, a closer interval. I'm going to choose that A. That means I have a choice here really between doubling my root. I can have my third or root, but remember, because we don't want to double the fifth is now used. So I'm going to choose in this case my root, and that leaves my F sharp, which I have to have, otherwise I don't have an F sharp triad, I don't have major or minor, won't know the difference, so I have a very different voicing here. And we can hear that sounds very different from this, can't we? Even on the piano, it sounds very different. The difference in how this is spaced is referred to if its position. If it's very wide like this, we refer to it as open position. If it's very close like this, we refer to it as enclosed position. Wide position is there is a wide interval spread between all the voices. Closed position, between them, it's generally smaller intervals in general. Now, having said that, there is now another set of definitions we have to learn. We refer to this as being, when it's wide in open position, an open voiced chord or position chord, and this one is a closed position chord or a closed voicing. In our system, we have a spectrum from very, very close to very, very open, and there is, again, no rule what's right or not. Context will tell us what's right. But you can hear the difference between the two. Let's do one more closed voicing. Here I still want my D down here. This time I'm going to get very close. Have my F sharp down here, put my alto way down here, and my soprano down there. You notice how close these intervals are, thirds and fourths the whole way. Listen to this. Compared to the open voicing, compared to the closed voicing that wasn't quite as close, and now listen to the really closed voicing. They all have a different sound, don't they? Let's go one further in the opposite direction. Let's have a really open voicing. This time I'm going to ask my basses to still sing that note, but I'm going to put my tenors way at the top of the registers in F sharp. And I'm going to ask my altos to sing maybe this high, well, let's have them sing a high D. Now that's very unusual, but let's just do it. And then way up here in the sopranos, an A. See, the voices are still getting smaller, the intervals are still smaller as I go up. And in this case, this is going to be a little hard to play, but let me try it again. And you can hear how that sounds. Now let's listen to that open voicing. The very first, then the closed voicing, the first closed voicing, and then the one right here. And they all have a different sound, don't they? They have a different quality or character. Open voices tend to sound very bright. Closed voicings tend to sound more muted, more covered, more intimate. So, we have a choice in voicings when we have no contact between open voices and closed voicing. And we have a spectrum from very closed to very open. And you can use those at all, but in different ways. But the rule of, remember, is that as we ascend, we try to make the intervals closer and closer. So that's speaking to individual voicings for one single triad. Double the root. If you can't double the root, double the third. Don't double the fifth until, except for the rule we're going to tell you about later on, the one specific places we'd like to do that. And as we are voicing an individual harmony, try to always make the interval with smaller distance between the two different voices as we raise up, or vice versa as we lower. They get wider and wider in the intervals. Closed voicings, they're all packed pretty much together. The smaller intervals, wide voicings, or open voicings, they're all spread apart. The rule of thumb for defining, just defining what an open voicing is an octave or more between tenor and soprano voices. No judgment about that, and then it's not a kind of fast rule, but that's how we kind of make our breaking point. If there's less than an octave between tenor and soprano voices, we refer to that as closed voicing. If it is more, we refer to it as open voicing. Okay, now that we have that idea of how to voice an individual chord, we want to know how to move from one harmony to another. So let's take two harmonies and think about our individual voices. I'm going to stay in the key of D, and I'm going to have a D major, or an A major triad moving to a D major triad. So the first thing I do is I have to have a voicing. And I have to have a voicing because I have to see how the individual voices move. So I'm going to voice this A major harmony. Because they're both in root position, I have really no choice about what is the lowest pitch, only the choice about the register. I know that the lowest pitch has got to be an A here or here, and then the second harmony has got to be a D here, a D here, or a D here. Otherwise, it's not in the human singing range for male voices, or in the proper range for most bass instruments other than doubling bass instruments such as tuba and contrabass. So, having done that, I want to take probably the closest one. I'm going to choose this A, and I have the choice between here and here. I'm going to choose the upper one. Again, context will tell us what's right, what's wrong. Warning though, in this particular choice, that D is hard to sing for anything other than mature men and a professional choir. It's a pretty low note. All right, so I'm going to go back now and voice this particular harmony. In this case, I'm going to make an open voicing, an octave there, and I'll choose a fifth here, and a fourth, and a sixth on top. A sixth on top. Notice I doubled my bass. I double my root, excuse me, and I have a third and a fifth. I have not doubled my fifth. And then I have an octave, a fifth, and then a sixth, which is close enough for saying that we're descending. All right, so now we have our rules. The rules, if we're moving from triad to triad, are relatively straightforward. If we remember them this way, it helps a lot. Rule number one, if you can do nothing, do nothing. That means if you can find a pitch that is again repeated in the next harmony, if the pitch is repeated in the next harmony, retain that harmony. There's an A here in my A major chord, and I look in the second chord, and I see there's also an A in this harmony. The best thing to do is retain that A. That is the standard, easiest thing to do. Retain the A. So rule number one, if you have a possibility of doing nothing, do nothing. If there is a repetition of that pitch in the next harmony, save it. Just continue on that. Rule number two is if you cannot find a common pitch, then we want to move as little as possible, meaning stepwise movement. So if there's no common pitch from one harmony to the other, move by step. step up or step down. In this case, let's take the soprano voice. There's a C sharp. The C sharp is here, and there is no C sharp in that harmony. Therefore, I have to look for what would be a proximity pitch. Is there a pitch a step up or a step down from C sharp? Indeed, there is the D. And so that would be my best choice. The D is my best choice in this case. Okay? Lastly, then, we have our last voice here. And here, again, it automatically tells us what we have to do. What's missing from this harmony? The F sharp, the third. And it moves also by what? By step. Now let's try a second experiment with this with three voices, three triads moving from one to another. In this case, I have an E minor triad moving to an A major triad to D major triad, supertonic to dominant to tonic. And if you listen, all of that made sense to our ear. We heard that those harmonies moved one to the other. We also heard, I think, you can hear this, that we have a sense of no individual voices. We have a sense of three block harmonies moving, and we don't have the elegance of individual lines moving. We want to have that sense of lines movement and logical voice leading, one chord tone leading to another chord tone. So let's use these three harmonies to see how this works one more time. First off, again, my bass is predetermined. I could go down here, but that's a very low note. I'm going to choose here for my bass, and I'm going to choose my A up here, but I could have chosen that one down here. And my D, certainly this would be a big mistake. And so again, my choices, that's a pretty high note for a bass, and also makes my tenors have to sing very high, so I'm going to choose that D right there. And again, I'm going to voice one harmony. I'm going to start my first harmony, my supertonic, my E minor chord, and I'm going to voice this very conservatively in a closed position chord. See how close the intervals are? See that we have a fifth here, followed by fourth, followed by third, and then moving, getting narrower as I get up, and that they're closed down, that there's less than an octave between my tenor and my soprano, so it's officially a closed voicing. It's a good place to start. Now the voice lead rules. Rule number one. Stay still, you can just move from the same pitch to the same pitch and do so. Stay stationary if possible. If you can't do that, see if you can find a voice a step above, a step below. So let's choose my tenor voice. I have a B. Is there a B in the second harmony? No. However, is there a pitch a step up or a step below? There are two, a C sharp and an A. Well, the A is already taken by the bass, and I could double that. That's one possibility. But for right now, I'm going to choose instead to do the C sharp. That's a matter of choice, and I can go back and change that if I want. Now, I'm going to look at the next harmony here. I have a C sharp. Is there a C sharp in my last harmony? No, there's not. Is there a pitch that is a step above or step below? Indeed, the D is right there. All right, so I got one voice done. And I can go back and change this if I need to make the voices logical, but this is a good place to start. Same thing now with my alto voice. I have an E. Is there an E in my second harmony? Yes, there is. Right there. I have an E. So I'll stay stationary. Now looking at the next one, I have a choice between a D and an F sharp. And I see the D is already taken, so I'm going to choose the F sharp for now. Again, I can go back and change that if I need, and you'll find when you do this kind of voice leading, often you'll have to go back and readjust and work it so it works correctly. Lastly, I have my soprano voice. There is no G in this harmony, but there is an A. I can choose that. And then, is there an A in this harmony? Indeed there is. And I can just stay stationary. Now listen to this voice, led correctly at four voices. Compare that just to the individual triads. Nothing wrong with that, but you can hear there's three separate units. We don't hear a sense of voice. Listen to the voicing here. I think we can hear we have individual voices there. Listen to the soprano voice alone. Listen to the alto voice alone. That's right. Listen to the soprano and alto voice together. dance together there? Listen to the tenor voice alone. Listen to the tenor voice now with the bass voice. That's my bass voice. Now listen to them together. You see how they dance together. Listen to then the three upper voices, soprano, alto, and tenor. And then we add them all together, and you see we have that sense of four voices moving. And so we have then our full voices. Now, having given you the rules of what to do, a couple of rules we should know what to avoid. Because our system originated, came out of a system that doubled the voices in what we call parallelism, often by the perfect fifth. The perfect fifth makes a sense, like gives us our ear a sense we no longer have a separate voice. So, for example, a voicing in which I decide to do this, even if I choose the other voices, in a way that gives me perhaps, gives me perhaps the sense of being voiced, you're going to hear this, hopefully. You will hear that the bottom two voices sound like one voice. Observe me. Let me just get that right. I had that wrong. If I have in this example that the tenor and the bass are always just a fifth apart, I will get the sense that they are just one voice. Even when I have the other two voices doing their dance of harmony, it will sound, instead of four voices, it will sound like it's three voices, because the parallelity of the fifth is always there. Listen to this. You hear the bottom voices sound very much like they're just one voice? Scratch, scratch. Okay, now having learned the rules of what to do, let's learn a few things that we need to think about avoiding. We've already learned that we need to think about avoiding doubling the perfect, or doubling the fifth of a triad. It's an important thing, so try not to double the fifth if possible. But we also need to know about intervals that are also going to give us a sense of not having a balanced chord. Now, to understand the why of this, we have to remember that our system was based originally that everybody sang together, and because not everybody's voice fit in that register, some people sang at the octave, and because sometimes that was too high for some, too low for some, we chose another interval, generally speaking, the perfect fifth, and we doubled that without necessarily sounding like we have a separate voice. And I think we can all, again, hear that certainly when I double at the octave and keep it always at the octave, when I have parallel octaves between those three pitches, it doesn't sound like a separate voice at all. It sounds like I'm just reinforcing it. Same thing with my fifth. Reinforces the melody, it is harmony in that sense, but it doesn't sound like an individual voice. So we want to avoid parallel octaves and parallel fifths in our voicings. For example, in this case, the tenor and the bass are always a fifth apart, perfect fifth apart. Even though the other voices will have individual melodies and will change intervals, the tenor and the bass won't. Now listen to how this sounds. evident here. We don't have the sense that the tenor and bass are moving as independent voices. Instead, they sound like they're reinforcing each other. So we want to avoid having a parallel fifth from one harmony to another and a parallel fifth moving to the other. The same thing with octaves. We want to avoid, to give ourselves a sense of three independent voices. We would like to, if possible, avoid the middle voice, or avoid the paralleling the voices. I'm going to make this easier. We want to avoid that one voice tracks at the octave or at the super octave. And again, I think you can hear that this movement of an octave, parallel octave, in that we lose a voice. Again, is this a rule that if you break the rule that you correct music? No, you may choose at some point to say, I want to lose a voice for a moment because I want the richness of that perfect fifth, or I need the strength of that octave. That is perfectly fine. But the general rule is to avoid parallel fifths and parallel octaves. Also, and we'll learn that this will be more important in minor, avoid moving from, let's take the key of B minor, because we'll see the example pretty quickly. We're in key of B minor. Avoid moving by in the voice by an augmented second. An augmented second will not sound like it sounds like a minor third, right? And it makes it for very, very difficult singing. And also, it will sound like we have a gap in there. So avoid augmented seconds in one voice if possible. Positive rules. Good things we have. We have the doublings, move by voice, single voice, stationary if possible, move by single step, if up and down if possible, avoid our parallel fifths, our parallel octaves, and one more rule that is always good to do, and that is, if possible, and it should be possible almost everything you have, try to have at least one voice move in the opposite direction as the other voices. So if two voices are moving down, try to make one voice move up. If two voices are moving up, try to make one voice moving down. This is referred to as contrary motion and should make for the most interesting sound, because that contrasting motion will profile that we have moving voices, and that is the point here. Voice leading is to give the sense of individual voices from harmonies to harmony, in which the individual voice in that harmony can be heard as a melody. That's the magic of our system.